Good afternoon. This is your host, John, of the Research Review, creating a platform to connect and inspire. I'm here with another excellent guest today, Haley, and also recent 3-minute thesis winner, our second 3-minute thesis winner to come on the show so far. So it is a pleasure having you on. I know a lot of people have been looking forward to this episode, and I'm excited to get this started.
Yeah.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your research?
So I'm a sophomore majoring in aerospace engineering right now. I currently have a minor in applied math, but I'm probably going to be changing that to sociology.
Mm-hmm.
I am the co-founder and current events coordinator of the Women in Engineering Club at Kent State, and we've done a lot of cool stuff. Like we hosted last March a Women in STEM collaborative meeting, which we're going to be hosting another one this year. We hosted the first Introduce a Girl to Engineering Day last fall in October, which was really fun. And then we just do a lot of guest speakers and everything. I'm also a member of the Honors College. I was in the 2021 class of the Honors Leadership Academy, which was really cool. I am the current undergraduate student trustee, and then I also do undergrad research. In addition to, I work in the communications and marketing team at the College of Aeronautics and Engineering.
Wow, that's incredible. So out of everything that you have on your plate right now, two things. How do you balance it? And then what is your favorite thing that you're doing?
I don't have a favorite, because I think if I had a favorite, I would spend all of my time doing that and none of my time doing anything else. And as far as balancing all of that, Google Calendar is my friend.
Yes.
I was joking with one of my friends earlier today. I don't think I could function at this point in my life without it, because I use my phone for a lot of things. I have all of my to-do lists and everything for all of my classes in my calendar. So if I have something due or something coming up, I can see that, and my phone will yell at me if I don't get it done. Or you have materials and processes in half an hour. Oh, okay, time to head to Bowman.
Yeah, sometimes that is an absolute lifesaver. When I first turned it on, at first I thought this would be annoying, but I gave it a shot, and I was like, wow, you just saved me from missing about 3 things.
Yeah. No, I don't think that I would be able to manage my time without using some form of app or something. So
yeah,
it works well.
Yeah, no, and it's definitely good. Like you said, you don't have a favorite because that would be the one you'd be doing. I think it's really good to stay balanced with things.
Yeah.
Because if you did just have that one thing that you were doing and you gave all your time with that, it's really easy to burn out.
Yeah.
And it's nice and to lose enthusiasm in it. Enthusiasm is a big personality trait that really helps you with your work. And if you don't have something to bounce over to and divide your time up, it's really easy to lose that enthusiasm. So it sounds like you're really doing a really good job with that.
Yeah, and I'm also a big proponent of lifelong learning, and I feel if I'm not always learning or growing some way or building some skill, I'm going to get really bored and stale and stagnant and whatever. So I do think it's funny, when I go to apply to internships or whatever, I have all these not weird experiences, but just things that you're well, why do you have experience in that? I have during my academic career and before college, I've done a lot of educational programming. I have a lot of experience with communications, obviously research now to get more of the technical side of it. So it's always weird when I go to apply to internships, because I'm I feel all of this is valuable, but how am I supposed to pick 2 or 3 things to highlight in a cover letter?
Right.
But I think that makes me more well-rounded, and that's in and of itself one of my strengths, is just that I try not to over-specialize myself. Has its downfalls, it has its benefits, because there's a lot of things that I can at least do well enough to get by.
Right. No, I totally agree with that. That's exactly how I like to function as well. And communication, like you said, you definitely have great communication skills. Being the first place winner in the 3-minute thesis, and that's definitely one of the biggest traits someone can have, especially in research too.
Yeah.
Someone said, I think this was Garrett actually said this. I shouted him out a bunch on the podcast. His was one of my favorites. He said, it doesn't matter about the product that you have. If you can't communicate it effectively, then it's not going to sell.
Exactly. And I feel like depending on the way that you use your time and the things that you get involved in, if you over-specialize in something, whether that's over-specializing in communicating. I mean, if you are really good at talking about something but you don't have anything to talk about, then you're kind of negating the purpose of having all those communication skills. Same thing with like, okay, if you're really good at designing a product or you're really good at making something or doing something, but you don't have the skills or the resources to share that with people, then you don't have a marketable skill or a marketable product. You have a thing sitting on your shelf.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. And you kind of get lost in the process as well. And you don't realize that the other people that you're talking with aren't as specialized as you are in that field, because you start to get blinded by your work. And you start to think that, everyone else thinks as you. So, yeah, it's good to have that, well-rounded ability and realistic expectations.
Yeah. And I don't think that there's a single, industry or career that doesn't need well-rounded people. It doesn't matter if you're an engineer or you're going into public health or you're a doctor or you're a professor. You need to be a well-rounded person to be able to share that knowledge with other people.
Yeah.
Whether that's through teaching or through communications or through a podcast or, selling a product or marketing a product. You have to be able to interact with other people and share that as well as have that marketable product.
Yeah, I know you brought up especially with like doctors too. That's one really big thing that they're pushing, because doctors can become so specialized, and a lot of healthcare officials are really pushing doctors to emphasize on patient care, and they want to teach that a lot better in medical school. And a lot of doctors are starting to pair their MD with like a master's in public health as well, because they think it's really helpful to get a good understanding of also, cultural factors of their patients and other socioeconomic factors of the patients, and other, how to stop diseases with preventative measures rather than later on treatments.
Right. And I think also, to your point, especially with like medicine, and then same thing with like engineers. Not everybody should be a mechanical engineer, because mechanical engineers might not, depending on where you go to school or what you have an interest in, you think about the difference between, mechanical engineers or like cybersecurity engineers.
Right.
Where cybersecurity, you're focusing so much on the computer side of things, on the code. With mechanical, you're focusing on the physical thing. It's harder to, I guess it's harder to not have a specialization there. Same thing with medicine. I mean, if you're going under surgery for a broken hip or something, or you need your hip replaced, would you want a, cardiovascular surgeon doing your hip replacement? Like, there's a value in that specialization. You just also have to walk a fine line of, am I over-specializing, or am I specializing, but I still have that well-roundedness to me where I can communicate that with other people? And I, as an orthopedic surgeon, can still work with cardiovascular surgeons. I just don't have the same exact skill set.
Yeah.
Because, frankly, if we all had the same skill set, then I think colleges would go out of business teaching those more specialized skill sets and everything.
And we'd be boring. There would be no reason for collaboration, really.
I know. People would be boring.
Yeah.
There'd be no reason to learn more, because if everybody knows the same thing, then how do we know that there are other things out there to learn?
Yeah, I totally agree. It's great that you've identified that so early, and it's great that you're using that right now. And now, what kind of attracted you? I know you mentioned like the different specializations of engineering. What attracted you to aerospace engineering specifically?
I was always really good at math in high school and in like elementary school and everything. I think it's very funny. For a while, I hated math. I did not want anything to do with it.
Really?
At one point, and I was probably like 10 maybe, like 8, 9, 10-ish, I just said to my mom, I don't like numbers, but numbers like me. I was good at it, but I didn't want to do it.
Right.
And so when I got to high school and I realized, oh, hey, I can capitalize on this, or there are, careers out there that I can use this skill that I'm really good at, I started taking a lot more math classes. I started challenging myself more in that way. And actually, at first, just because of what I was curious in, I was looking at going to school to be a geneticist because
Really? Oh, that's sweet.
NASA's, a couple years ago, their twin study, they sent one twin up to the ISS for a year, and then they kept the other twin on the ground, and they were monitoring the genetic changes so that for stuff like, the Artemis missions, when we go back to the moon and we're in space for longer periods of time, and eventually when we go to Mars, we kind of know what we're looking at as far as like muscular atrophy, DNA shortening, telomere shortening, stuff like that. We know what we're working with. I loved that. I was fascinated by it. So I was like, I'm going to go to school to be a geneticist. I'm going to major in biology. I'm going to go get my doctorate and everything, my MD. It's going to be great. And then I took a college biology class as a CCP student, and I went, there's no way I'm doing this. And so I was like, well, how do I really enjoy space exploration. I'm really good at math. I need to do something STEM. What do I want to do? So I was like, aerospace engineering. That's, the mix of all of it. I'm going to get to work with these geneticists, but not be a geneticist,
Right.
And I'm glad that I did that because I really enjoy like what I'm doing and what I'm learning about and the things that I'm going to get to do in my career.
Yeah, no, that's, like I said, that's great that you figure that out early on. There's some people who don't even figure that out until they get into the workforce.
Yeah.
And they're like, I don't want to do this anymore. And then they got to, completely start over from scratch all over again.
And I think that's a huge value of like research and doing internships and stuff is regardless of what field you're in, it gets you out of the classroom sooner. And so, if you realize, oh crap, I really don't want to do this. You realize that before you hit the workforce and you're like, well, now I've been working for a year and a half. I don't, my employer will pay for me to go further this education, not go back and redo it. What am I supposed to do? So I'm a big fan of research, and I, praise it. I praise the SURE program to pretty much everybody I talk to. I actually just had a friend of mine ask me about it today. She's thinking about doing it in, a year or two.
Oh, that's sweet.
And I'm like, do it.
Yeah,
I'm like, you
do it.
Absolutely do it.
And not even necessarily for the research projects are cool. Don't get me wrong. But for the research experience alone.
Yeah. Because even if, okay, maybe you don't love the project you were on or you don't love the direction you're taking it, you can take those skills and apply them anywhere else.
Yeah.
And, you mentioned this earlier, there's a lot of employers that look for those skills that you gain from research or from some sort of outside of the classroom technical experience. You can't get that from in a classroom.
Yeah.
There are things that you have to get out and learn on your own that no lecturer is going to be able to convey to you.
Right. And those are skills that you can use in every single aspect of your life, including when you get a job.
Right.
Yeah, they're a lot more interested in the research experience itself and the projects.
Yeah.
And I remember I recently had an interview a couple weeks ago. Yeah, a couple weeks ago or 3 weeks ago. And they brought up, they were looking at my resume and they brought up like, hey, I noticed you did something with HIV. And then I was like, yeah, I did that. And then they were like, but they didn't ask anything about the project itself. They said, what have you kind of learned from doing research? They said, what was your biggest challenge in it? What was your biggest accomplishment? And what would you do differently next time? They asked those 4 questions, but they didn't ask me anything about my project,
Yeah, because there's also, and again, one of the huge things that you learn from doing research or doing an internship or something outside of the classroom, there's a big difference between a homework being hard and you having to figure out how to get over, okay, I have a really hard problem on this homework. I need to get over this hurdle versus a hurdle in research where you're like, I have no idea what these numbers mean or I have no idea how to operate this equipment, where you either have to ask for help or you have to do a lot of, figuring it out, a lot of problem solving to get there. And it's a different kind of hard. And different careers, it's a different kind of hard. You can pick things that are not as hard, but still, it's skills that I don't think anybody should go without learning before they graduate.
Definitely, yeah. And communication is a huge piece of those skills that you learn.
Yeah.
Communication and collaboration. What do you think has been the best thing that you've learned from your research experience so far?
I think the coolest thing about my research experience was just kind of the lab experience, because I'm from a very rural hometown. Biggest thing is farming. A lot of people have careers that are either in ag or ag adjacent. And so there's not a lot of, I guess, exposure to engineering.
Yeah.
And so being in the lab for the first time, I think I have a Snapchat video of me walking around the lab and being just so excited and having the dumbest little smile on my face because I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm in here.
What was it like?
It felt surreal because I'm like, I have never worked with any of this material before, and I was so excited to get to learn it and to get to work with it, and just to have those skills that there's no way I could have learned that from a class at this stage.
Right.
So I was very excited, and also to get to work with the different faculty, because not only was I working with my mentor who was overseeing everything, but I was also working with other faculty members at the CAE who were helping me 3D print things, who were helping me mount my planes so that I could actually put them in the wind tunnel and run these tests. And so I was, learning about, well, why are we using stainless steel rods and not aluminum, or why are we printing in this material, or why are we using this layer height, stuff like that. It was just, it's an experience that I could not have possibly gotten from a class.
A wind tunnel, that sounds sweet.
Fun.
I would be excited if I saw something like that too.
I was very nervous at first because, and it's a subsonic wind tunnel, so it's, smaller. It doesn't go above 35 meters per second of, the airspeed. But I was very nervous because I'm like, what if I push the wrong button, or what if I mount it wrong and it's not stable and then it just breaks?
Yeah.
And, but again, it's back to that research the things that you can only learn from actually being out of the classroom and doing it yourself.
Right.
I couldn't have learned how to mount that in my aerodynamics class, you know what I mean? And it's the problem solving of, okay, well, if I push this button, or if I do things in this order, this happens.
Yeah.
But I don't want that to happen. I want this to happen. How do I make that happen?
Right. You think learning that type of thinking and getting used to that type of thinking has helped you within your engineering coursework?
Yeah, absolutely, because I think that engineering as a whole introduces you to like a different kind of problem solving where, maybe the solutions that aren't immediately obvious, you start to almost think backwards. And it's funny, I was actually talking to one of my friends about this today. You see the problem, right? And maybe, you have an idea of the solution of like, okay, well, it would be cool if we solved it this way, or it would be helpful if we solved it this way, or, functional or whatever.
Yeah.
And so I find that it's easier to almost backtrack from a solution. And I do the same thing on my homework when I get super, super stuck. I'm like, okay, this is what I'm looking for. How did we get there?
Right.
And, you think, some engineers think forward in the progression, like, okay, I want to go in this direction. This is a step that I can take here.
Yeah.
Some engineers think backwards, where, okay, here's my solution. Here's the next step down from it, and so on and so forth. And through research and out of the classroom experiences, I've gotten to play around with both of those methods of thinking, and it's just been incredibly helpful. And
Right.
I don't think, again, I don't think that's something I could have learned from a classroom experience.
Yeah. No, totally. And you said with engineering gives you helps your mind work to solve problems differently. I know the America's richest people have degrees in either business, economics, or engineering. And engineering is one of the top ones because of the ability that teaches you to solve problems, you know, and makes them the lead innovators within society.
Yeah. And it's interesting, too. One of the girls I work with is a hospitality management major, and every career is a different kind of hard. I could never do what she does on a daily basis, and vice versa, and that's okay. There are different careers and different types of learners for a reason. And we were setting up for an event the one day, and me and one of our other coworkers, who was another engineering major, there was this problem. We couldn't hang a banner or whatever, and we were like, oh, well, let's try this, and we fixed it. And she was just like, how did you get to that conclusion? And we're like, oh, well, you just, here's the progression.
Yeah.
And so it's always interesting, like, the way that we think is different, from the way that she thinks, and her progression is different than ours.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure that it's the same here. I mean, my thought progression is going to be different than yours. And so one skill that I feel like everybody needs is the communication aspect of it.
Yeah.
Of, wait, hold on. How did we get from point A to point B? And being able to backtrack and talk somebody through it, or
Right.
explain, like, well, why are we doing it that way and not this way?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that is incredibly valuable regardless of the field that you're in.
Yeah, because it's great to have all those different thought processes.
Mm-hmm.
And it becomes even more valuable when everyone on a team is able to communicate the way that they think,
Yeah.
because that helps you, solve a problem a lot more effectively.
Yeah. And to your point about, like, the business and, economics and engineering side of things, those professions have the opportunity and have the potential to get so highly specialized.
Yeah.
I'm not as versed on the business side of things, but with engineering, you think, oh, I'm going to be an engineer. Well, what kind of engineer? Because mechanical, automotive, mechatronics, aerospace, cybersecurity, electrical, like the list goes on. And so I feel like in those specialized fields, the most successful people are the best communicators, because even as an aerospace engineering student, if I'm sitting here talking to an electrical engineer, if they can't walk me through it,
Right.
then I don't understand the solution.
Yeah.
Same thing with, like, if, an electrical engineer is sitting there trying to explain to a business person why we got to a certain conclusion, or vice versa, the business person explaining to the electrical engineer. You're not going to get anywhere if you can't explain your solutions.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. And, that's why I think that you're going to go so far in what you're doing.
Thank
and why
you.
you already have.
Thank you.
You mentioned mechatronics. I know that's like a fairly new engineering field, isn't it?
It's new locally, I would say.
Okay.
Most mechatronics engineering programs are not in the United States. I believe that Kent State is either one of the only, or it's the only university in the entire country that has mechatronics as a degree program.
Okay.
Which is so incredibly valuable,
Yeah.
especially now in 2023, as you have all this electronic equipment sitting in front of you. Chat GPT is coming out, and
that's
everybody
crazy.
as we as a society transition more towards electronics running our lives. I mean, we all have phones that we can't live without.
Yeah.
I was talking about Google Calendar earlier that just runs my life. We need more highly specialized things in different engineering disciplines, and mechatronics specifically encompasses a lot. It includes mechanical, it includes electrical, it includes automation, and so a lot of mechatronics engineers, what a lot of them will end up doing is going into some form of, like, robotics or, automation.
Right.
So one of the engineers that we've hosted a couple times for Women in Engineering is a speaker. She works at Tesla. She's an automation engineer. She majored in electrical engineering, but a lot of our mechatronics majors relate to her a lot because of what she's doing. She works at Tesla. She works as an automation engineer. And so she programs the robots that build the cars. And pretty much every automotive industry now is either, even you think about when cars were first invented, the assembly line. Well, the assembly line in Henry Ford's day looked so different from today.
Yeah.
And most of it is either fully automated or semi-automated. And there has to be somebody behind the scenes programming those robots, designing those pieces of equipment. And that's where your mechatronics engineers come in.
Right.
A lot of them. And so as it's a growing industry, there's not a whole lot of programs, but they are incredibly valuable.
Yeah. And that sounds so cool, too, that you're able to, you get that broad, like you mentioned, a little bit of electrical, a little bit of mechanical, and computers.
Yeah, a little bit of programming. I
Little bit of
know one of the
programming.
classes that I have a couple friends that are in mechatronics, and they have to take, like, I think it's C. I think they have to learn C, and I know they have to learn MATLAB as well. So it's a lot of different skills wrapped up into one major that is going to set them up for success so much.
Right. Yeah. It gets you those broad disciplines. Yeah. You mentioned ChatGPT. Have you got a chance to play around with that at all?
A little bit, yeah. I think it's a little bit terrifying, but it's also really cool.
Oh, that's crazy.
Just because, the way that that's coded, I think it's going to learn as it goes and as people ask more questions. So I asked it something the one day I was playing around with it, and I think I asked it something about my research just to see, like, okay, how much does this thing actually know? And I was kind of baiting it for the answer that I wanted, and it didn't quite get there, but I'm sure if I gave it another month or so, it would hit the nail on the head, and I'd be like, oh, crap.
Yeah, it's just in its infancy, too.
Yeah. I mean, it rolled out, a month ago?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. They started beta testing or whatever. So it's going to be an incredible piece of technology, but it's going to change the way that people learn. It's going to change the way that people teach. It's going to change the way that we access information.
Yeah.
And this is only really the first of its kind. I mean, yes, there's Google and, Yahoo and all those other search engines, but this is more than that.
Yeah.
And I am fascinated to see where this goes in the next 5-10 years.
Mm-hmm. No, totally.
A little bit terrified, but fascinated as well.
Yeah, like you said, like everything's going to have to change, especially I think in our education system.
Yeah.
And how we, how we teach kids. We're going to start, I think, having to give students the opportunity to work more with technology and teach them to work with technology, do projects integrated with technology, rather than, just a classic book and paper kind of style.
And I think that even before ChatGPT, both of my parents were in education my entire life, so education has always been very near and dear to my heart. The way that, because again, you think about it, so like our grandparents' generation, they have lived through the moon landing. When they were born, nobody had ever left Earth.
Yeah.
They have seen the moon landing. They've seen computers. They've seen MTV. They have seen cell phones that they carry around in their pockets. It's been, an overwhelming amount of technological advancement. Whereas, like, our generation, we've only ever known this technology. You know what I mean? And same thing with, like, when people our age ask current, like, 8 or 9-year-olds about something or about technology, sometimes people at our age feel out of the loop.
Yeah.
Because we've never known a society without computers or without technology. They've never known life without cell phones. And so the way that human beings learn and frankly exist is entirely changing. And to your point about the way that people learn, there are professors. My physics professor last semester, at the beginning, and over time he got better about it. He was very much like, no phones, no laptops. You take notes on a pen and paper.
Really?
Well, that's not how everybody learns.
Yeah.
A lot of people in my classes, they take notes on like Microsoft Whiteboard or OneNote, and it's all on their computer or a tablet or something. They don't do pen and paper anymore, and if they were to, their grades would drop just because, you're asking this drastic change of them when this is the way that they've learned all through high school, through junior high, some of them even into elementary school. So and I'm interested to see, 10, 20 years from now when people start doing, full-scale studies on, like, the way that people learned 50 years ago versus the way that people learn today. I'm interested to see how drastic a change it is because, I mean, just thinking about it is crazy. To see a full-scale study would be absolutely insane.
It would be. It would be totally crazy. And like you said, thinking back to our grandparents and how they've seen, that whole progression of technology is really crazy.
Yeah.
My shout out to my grandpa. I showed him ChatGPT a couple days ago for the first time, and he was blown away. And especially he worked on the first UNIVAC computers, the ones that were like, as big as a room. And they ran off
big
like,
IBMs and everything.
Yeah, those things. They ran off like the 1 and 0 code, everything.
Binary.
So binary code. That's what it was. So he's always been really smart with technology. So he's been able to like, get a basic like understanding of everything new as it's rolled out, and he's tried to keep up with the times and everything. But yeah, I showed him the new ChatGPT, and he was just blown away. Absolutely blown away. He knew everything about the UNIVAC computer that he knew. It's creative too. You can ask it to write a poem, and it writes one flawlessly.
It's that, I think, is why I'm like, Oh my gosh. And why a lot of people are also a little bit wary of it is just because, if we pulled up Chat GPT right now, we asked it the same question, worded it the exact same way, fed it the exact same information, we would get 2 different answers.
We would, yeah.
Because it differentiates. It's not like, something like Google or Yahoo, and if it was, there wouldn't be a market for it, where, it spits out, here's a web page, here's your information, here's a snippet of, I think this is the answer you're looking for.
Yeah.
ChatGPT has been designed to learn as people ask it questions, and as it's like, well, what about this? And it searches those existing databases and pulls that existing information and then uses its knowledge of grammar and the way that people talk to word it differently. So it feels like you're having a conversation with somebody online, like over, Instagram DMs or something. But no, it's just this piece of technology spitting information back at you according to this algorithm.
Mm-hmm. And to be honest, I think they're kind of doing it better than we do it.
I think in some cases, yeah.
And it's going to get a lot better and better.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that scares me is, when the whole idea of artificial intelligence rolled out, people were more concerned of it taking its role in automation, taking factory jobs, taking restaurant jobs, stuff like that. But it's also, it's taking over. It has the same abilities as engineers, as computer scientists, as artists. Yeah. It's able to make art. It's able to make music.
Right.
There's not ChatGPT specifically, but there's similar artificial intelligent programs that write songs and make music.
I think that has been a concern throughout history. That worry that people have right now is not specific to ChatGPT, because again, there's always going to be the concern of, this new technology is challenging what I know or what I can do, or it's going to take my job. I think that throughout history, we've seen that innovation fuels new markets.
True.
So
True.
You mentioned automation in factories, and I mentioned Taraya's work at Tesla. 30 years ago, your market wasn't for automation engineers. It was for those techs that were running those machines, those man-operated machines, and actually building the cars. Now the market is for people that know how to design those systems and techs that when those systems break, they can go in and fix it.
Yeah.
Same thing with AI. I mean, you can fully automate a factory, but you need somebody there to make sure that it doesn't break. You need somebody there to manufacture the materials before they get to the operating table or before they get to the factory line. There's always going to be a market for human beings in industry, regardless of if that's medicine or engineering or technology, whatever it might be. Just the way that market looks is going to change as we come up with new technology.
That's true. Like you brought up the idea of making new industries and stuff, but I think that the demand for people is going to decrease. You know what I mean?
I think it's going to decrease depending on the position. You know what I mean? Because again, just thinking back to the factory system, I mean, what was it? 200 years ago, we had kids working in factories and textile factories making these cloths because that's what we as a society needed. But obviously child labor isn't that good of a market.
Right.
And so technology over time has made us safer. And same thing with cell phones now. I mean, there were people 20, 30 years ago when this technology started coming out that were like, I don't want a phone in my pocket.
Right.
I don't want this type of technology with me. I don't want to become reliant on it. But now out of, ease and out of making things easier and safer and more efficient, we rely on technology a lot more than we used to.
Yeah.
And so again, it goes back to that idea of innovation and technology is going to fuel new markets. We don't know what those markets look like.
Right.
But again, you think about our grandparents' generation. That's going to look, what they thought that 2023 was going to look like is definitely different than it does.
True.
And, what we think 40, 50 years from now is going to look like is going to be vastly different from what actually happens.
Yeah.
Just because we have no idea of knowing what new technology is going to come out or what new innovation.
That's really crazy to think. Yeah, I like that you said that. And I think, that change, since, like you said, it started with the first, UNIVAC, from our grandparents started with the first UNIVAC computer, and now it went to, the Chat GPT and all that.
Yeah.
I think that whole change is going to be, even greater within our lifetimes.
Yeah.
Because, as technology gets greater and greater, innovation and advancement moves faster and faster. So, it's going to be unfathomable.
Yeah.
what we're gonna see.
It's overwhelming to think about too, because again, we can't comprehend the amount of technological advancement and everything that we're gonna witness before we pass away. Neither could our grandparents.
Yeah.
Neither will our children's generation. Couldn't think of the word, but we don't have the capacity to fathom these things big picture. And if we did, we'd have the technology by now.
Right.
But, we're getting there.
Yeah.
People are working on these things, and I love, seeing the news stories or hearing about the research that's going on, not only just at the university, but on a global scale into some of these new technologies or medicines or, designs, just because there is so much out there right now that has the opportunity to revolutionize the way that we exist, or the way that we travel, or the way that we talk to each other, or whatever it might be. 20 years from now is going to look totally different than today does. And I am very excited to see it.
True. And it's definitely got to be so cool for you because you're an engineering researcher and you're on the cutting edge of this stuff. You're probably one of the first people to know about a new piece of technology before anyone else.
I wouldn't say one of the first people. It kind of depends on who gets to the news article before I do.
True.
But it does put me in a unique position. And I mentioned I work in my college's communications and advising office and everything. One of the things that I do is actually when our faculty members publish research or they get appointed to positions on advisory boards or whatever it might be, I take those papers or those pieces of information and I summarize it and I condense it into a form that your average reader can understand. And I get to leverage that technical background, but also, there's my passion for communications and for lifelong learning. I get to share that with people. And I think that that's true of any specialized field. You can put an engineering research paper in front of me and I can probably piece my way through it. But if you were to put, a medical study on the effects of a drug on a certain cancer in front of me, I wouldn't be able to get through it because I wouldn't know what half of the jargon means. So, again, it kind of depends on what is presented to me.
Right.
And I think that's true of any profession.
Yeah, no, definitely. Give us a quick rundown of what your research is and what you've been doing.
So my research is into the aerodynamic efficiency of different winglet shapes. So if you've ever taken a flight or been on a plane and looked out over the wing, most planes nowadays, if not all, I think I have yet to be on a plane that hasn't had one, they have this wingtip extension. It's called a winglet.
Yeah,
those little... Yeah, some of them look like that. Some of them are straight. And the whole purpose of that is to reduce the drag on the winglet, or on the wing, and by extension, the overall aircraft. Yeah. They started researching that in the 1970s at NASA, but the idea is actually from as early as the late 1800s, early 1900s, before humans ever took flight. And I can't remember where this research was happening, but they were thinking about improvements to efficiency and aerodynamic efficiency as it relates to just, vehicles and cars and whatever. Yeah. And so instead of the stationary winglets that they started looking into in the 70s, it was rotating plates at the end of, just monitoring the way that air flew over these rotating plates. It was actually kind of interesting to read a little tidbit about it.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah. And so when they started doing research in the 70s, they were like, oh, hey, these winglets work really well at drag reduction. And the whole way that it works is, okay, here's your wing, right? There's an area of high-pressure air underneath your wing that creates your lift, which is what keeps the airplane in the air.
Yeah,
we like that lift.
Yeah.
naturally that air wants to diffuse to an area of lower pressure air, which is on top of your wing.
Mm-hmm.
And then that movement around your wingtip creates a vortex.
Yeah.
And that adds a drag on the overall craft and slows you down. It slows you down. It raises fuel costs. It raises emissions. It makes your plane louder because it's working harder.
Uh-huh.
And so what winglets do is, okay, instead of your wingtip vortex being here, here's your winglet, now it's up here.
Right.
And it moves it above and behind the plane of the wing, so it decreases the overall drag, and then you have lower fuel costs, you have lower emissions, lower noise, all that good stuff. And that's what they found in the 70s. And then since the 90s, most of the research that people have done on it have been via computer simulation.
Yeah.
Because now we're right back to the conversation about technology. It's cheaper than physical testing.
Right.
And it's really hard to put a full-scale Boeing 737 in a wind tunnel and, blow air at it and see how it behaves.
Yeah.
Like, it's dangerous, it's unsafe, it's not cost-effective, but plugging it into a simulation makes more sense. So what we did with our project was we modeled and then 3D printed little plane models, and now they weren't 737 size, but they were more looking like Cessnas,
Mm-hmm.
so smaller, like 4-seater plane with these different winglet shapes. And then we put them in the wind tunnel at the College of Aeronautics and Engineering, and we tested them at a couple different velocities, a couple different angles of attack, which is just the inclination,
Yeah.
to see which was more efficient and kind of verify those computer studies that had been done on is this actually more efficient.
Wait, and how big were the planes that you put in the wind tunnel again?
So if I had to guess, they were probably the wingspan was 25 centimeters.
Okay.
And so the whole body span, nose to back end, I would say maybe 35 centimeters. So fairly small, about that.
Yeah.
Because we were using a subsonic wind tunnel. It's an AF-100. So small, university use size. This is not your NASA-sized wind tunnel that you would see in a movie like Hidden Figures, where it's an entire building of just this big fan.
I was going to say, we got something like that at Kent State.
No, it is much smaller, which is why we did the scale testing.
Right. That's
But,
cool. So
yeah.
what did you end up finding from the test that you ran?
So the patterns that we noticed in our data aligned pretty well with what prior computer simulations had found. Typically, and I'm going to, consult my notes before I mix up graphs in my brain. Consistently, as the angle of attack increased, which was, like I had mentioned earlier, your inclination, we also saw increases in the coefficient of lift and the coefficient of drag, which all those coefficients is it's a dimensionless quantity to compare your lift and drag that is produced to your dynamic pressure, which incorporates wingspan, planform wing area, and your velocity. They're coefficients to relate lift and drag to other, aerodynamic quantities.
Yeah.
But both lift and drag coefficients increased with increasing angle of attack, which is what we expected to see. And higher angles of attack also correlated to higher lift to drag ratios, which again, from our coefficients of lift and drag, made sense and was kind of what we were looking for. In our data, we also, and it's interesting because there's so many different winglet shapes out there. There's a couple main ones that you use. Like a lot of the ones that you would see on a commercial airline are going to all look pretty similar, if not the same. That's for a reason. One of the ones that we tested 4. We did a blended winglet, which is just a normal kind of like scooped extension a little bit.
Like that?
Like that, yeah. It's that one. We tested that one. We tested a plain wing, which no winglet, just flat. Yep. We also tested a Whitcomb winglet, which has both an upper and a low lower extension.
Split.
Yeah, it's split, yeah.
Okay.
And that's named after one of the original engineers from the 1970s, Dr. Richard Whitcomb.
Aren't those on some of the fighter jets?
Some of them, yeah, but they're much smaller.
Yeah.
And And then we also tested one. It's called a spiroid winglet, and it almost looks like a Mobius strip. It's like it's literally just a loop on the end of your wing. Yeah.
It's like a hollow, like it touches?
Yeah, it's hollow. Remind me, I can show you a picture of it.
Yeah.
No, do you know what a Mobius strip looks like?
No.
So that's the mathematical concept of, okay, I'm going to take a piece of paper here for a second. Wow, if I could rip that, that'd be cool. So, still not work. There we go. Okay. Mm-hmm. So you have this.
Yeah.
Normally, you would think it would connect like that, right?
Right.
Well, if you flip this, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to do it. Oh, there we go. Now you have one continuous surface. Oh. So, like, if I were to take a pencil and trace over this surface, I would never pick up my pen, and I would never, you know what I mean? Like here, okay, so here, if I traced it, you'd go around the outside, you wouldn't have anything on the middle.
Right.
If I flipped this and like stapled it or something, now I have a Mobius strip. And if I take my same pen and I draw along the side of this, I'm going to draw over every surface. There's only one surface technically here. So it's, if here's your...
That's interesting. What?
So if here's your wing, here's your spiroid winglet, basically. It's like a little loop.
Okay. Now, what makes the difference of it being like a Mobius versus if it was just like a normal circle?
The difference is that...
in terms of why it's a Mobius on the end of the wing. Like, why do they put that versus like normal circle?
I don't know. And it doesn't totally invert, but it's just, for basis of comparison, that's kind of what it looks like.
Mm-hmm. Can
honestly.
I see that other piece of paper?
Yeah, this one?
No, that one.
This one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'll show you. I told you my pops. Mm-hmm. He was a Cessna pilot.
Right.
He really liked your he was at the 3-minute
really?
thesis. Yeah, and he really liked your presentation.
Oh, no way.
Since he got the opportunity to get up there and present it. He really liked Kyle's episode too, so I know he's gonna like this one.
Cool.
But he taught me like the basic concept of lift.
Yeah.
He did take a paper plane like this. And then
I'm like trying to show it to the camera.
I keep forgetting we have these. And then you like rip the ends of them right here.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen this before?
Yeah, so that is almost an example of like a control surface.
A control surface.
So, you have your plane, and then there's 2 control surfaces on your front wing and either 1 or 2 on the back depending on the model. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to say they're elevators, and I'm really hoping that I'm not messing that up because I'm going to embarrass everybody in all my classes if I call them elevators and they're not. But in a lot of commercial-sized planes, your control surfaces are automated. So you can control them from the cockpit. The pilot has control over your elevators and everything.
It's like when he pulls like back, like these go like more down, don't they? The flaps? Yeah.
And then there's also 2 control surfaces in the front. So, if you have just pull up my paper again. So here's your plane. You have your main wing. Mm-hmm. You're going to have 2 control surfaces, one here, and then obviously same thing on the other side.
Yeah.
And then you're also going to have your back control surfaces, which is what you're demonstrating with that one.
This didn't fly as I planned it would. I thought it was supposed to go up.
Well, it might be the design of your plane, but I'm only a sophomore. I don't have the,
You're only a
expertise.
Sophomore?
Yeah,
really?
I'm only a sophomore,
Wow.
Second year right now.
Yeah, no, that didn't work.
It was worth a shot. It's okay. But yeah, so just kind of interesting stuff there. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting, too. So some of the studies that I read to, prep for this and to do my lit review and everything and just kind of get an idea of what I was working with.
Yeah.
They have, the simulation, the models of where those vortexes of air actually accumulate. And you can see really obvious in this simulation and in this graphic, it's a lot darker than it is with a winglet. And the location of it completely moves. It gets smaller, it gets lighter. So your overall effect is a lot less.
Yeah.
And again, if you decrease the drag on the end of your wing, you're going to decrease the overall skin friction drag that you feel on your whole craft. That's going to, reduce your emissions, your fuel costs, your fuel maintenance costs, everything. One study that they did, and they actually included a winglet design specific to Boeing. Mm-hmm. So a lot of and not all, but some Boeing models use, it's called a maxi winglet, and so
Maxi.
it's a bigger scoop than a blended, and it also has a little bit of a lower scoop.
Yeah.
So it's like you mix a blended and a Whitcomb, basically.
Okay.
At least that's what my interpretation of it is and my understanding. And with the use of that particular winglet, they did an analysis of, okay, how many more passengers can we carry? Yes, we know that it's decreasing drag, but is this really cost effective? Is it worth the money that we're going to put in to retrofit these winglets to our planes? They were able to prove that they could carry over 2,000 more passengers a year with the use of this winglet.
Wow.
And changing no other factors.
That's a lot.
So they're not changing fuel consumption. They're not changing anything. Same amount of fuel, same amount of, maintenance checks and everything. 2,000 more passengers.
Wow.
With the use of a winglet.
So that's pretty substantial finding. Yeah.
And so obviously with this kind of a potential improvement, and especially lately with, airplane fuel costs rising,
Right.
it is in the airline's best interest to either buy a plane that already has a winglet on it or retrofit a winglet, because all it does is it saves them money.
Yeah.
It saves them money, it lowers emissions, which is better for the environment, and your consumer is happy because your airline prices could be lower.
Right.
And I like to travel. I like lower airfare.
Yeah,
but
and it has been expensive lately. It has been so expensive lately.
No, it's been insane. And part of that is just the market because of post-COVID.
Right.
Part of that is the, all gas prices rising, even for airline or for vehicles. Airline gas was the same way. It was higher fuel costs. And then, again, just changing markets. You're losing some of your pilots. You're gaining some pilots. You're losing maintenance techs. You're gaining maintenance techs. It really depends on what's going on.
Right.
Just current event-wise, but...
Yeah, it sounds like there's a lot to, play into making a decision like that.
It's a lot, and that's something that I consider myself a frequent flyer. My family likes to travel, but until I got into this discipline and really started, seeing all of the different stuff that goes into that, it's, insane. There's so many different things, and I'm sure it's the same with public health. I mean, there's so many different considerations and factors that go into play whenever you're making a decision that I would have no idea about because that's not my background.
Yeah, there's a whole class on just decisions within public health policy.
Yeah. And it was interesting too. So with our conclusions that we came to was the spiroid model that I was telling you about, the weird loopy one.
Right, that cool thing, yeah.
The one that kind of reminds me of a Mobius strip just a little bit. Though that model actually showed the greatest overall changes in coefficient of drag, coefficient of lift, average lift to drag ratio, but it showed the biggest differences in all of it. So it's not like it was just trending in the positive direction, it was also showing the biggest trends in the negative direction.
Oh.
And on top of that, it's obviously not easy to manufacture. I mean, I modeled everything using Inventor software, which I like to think is pretty user-friendly as far as 3D modeling software goes.
Yeah.
But I had at least 12 to 18 work planes to model this thing. And
Really?
so I'm, adding a work plane. So here's my end of my wing. I have a work plane here.
Yeah.
Then I have one here. Then I have one here. And so forth all the way around. And it was insane. I think I took 2 or 3 days just on one winglet model.
Really?
That's tiny. And, oh my God, it was frustrating.
How much time in total do you think you spent on your, on some of the stuff within your research project?
I couldn't tell you. Models alone took me at least a week and a half.
Yeah.
3D printing took really long just because each model took, 6 to 8 hours, plus then it had to soak the supports off, then I had to go pick it up and make sure that it... So the 3D printing alone, I think, took at least a week, and I was trying to budget my time so that the printing was happening the week that I was on vacation. Yeah. We made it work. It was okay. And then the analysis, I wrote an analysis code in MATLAB just to kind of get some of my graphs and condense my raw data. That also took a long time. I mean, I think I probably spent 2-3 days on that.
Yeah.
But, yeah, no. So the spiroid model, despite showing all the biggest changes, obviously it's not the easiest to manufacture. And so when it comes to, okay, we want to actually apply this to real life, it doesn't make sense to, pay manufacturers and engineers all this money to make that a reality.
Right.
When it isn't entirely trending in the positive direction. And it also, because of the extra weight from all that material, it increases the wing root bending moment. So basically, instead of, with like a blended model or a canted model, you're pushing on your wing that much.
Mm-hmm.
With a spiroid model, you're pushing on it that much. Just because there's so much extra weight.
Right.
And so then there goes some of the structural integrity of your entire plane. And obviously you don't want to, compromise the structural integrity of your wing. That's pretty important. So that one, again, with our, analysis, we were able to pretty much rule out, no, it wouldn't make sense to apply this one. The Whitcomb model, it showed the biggest decrease in drag, which, we're looking for drag reducing geometries. Yay, go team.
Yeah.
But compared to the blended model,
Uh-huh.
the changes in the coefficient of lift, and the lift drag ratio, which is like our positive, trending direction,
Right.
was pretty insignificant. And so by way of, manufacturing, simplicity and just overall, trends in the data,
Mm-hmm.
the blended model's probably going to be the best for practical application, which is what other studies have found,
Right.
and which is what most airlines have gone with as the blended model or some form of a blended or canted model. The only difference is that just the swoop or no swoop.
Yeah.
That's what most people apply currently.
Okay.
And so our data lined up with previous data, which is exactly what we were going for, so we're happy.
Sweet. 2 claps for that.
Yeah.
And so that's what you would recommend?
Yeah, I would recommend a blended model. Just because it is, out of the ones that I studied, the easiest to manufacture,
Mm-hmm.
easiest to maintain, easiest as far as additional weight goes, and it's still proven to be effective.
Okay. So what are some of the steps moving forward?
There's a lot of continuous research going on right
Mm-hmm.
now. One of my favorite, so there's a couple of favorite research studies that I read in, doing all of this.
Right.
One of them was, instead of talking about the blended model, say we're talking about the canted model. So instead of a swoop, it's just a hard angle.
Yeah.
There have been studies done to show that it is most efficient to have a different cant angle at different phases of flight. So, your cant angle at takeoff is a different efficiency than your cant angle at cruising altitude, which for most airlines, it makes sense because you spend most of your time in the air, at least for commercial jets, cruising.
Yeah.
So just flat altitude. So most people focus on that, but there's still so much that can go wrong or so much that affects takeoff and landing. And so one of the studies actually did a very thorough analysis, and I really like the way they did this, of what angle is best at what phase of flight. So there's research now and, development now into how do we absolutely 100% optimize this. So maybe we have a winglet that in flight, cool, takeoff is done, now we're at cruising altitude, let's move our cant angle mid-flight.
Yeah.
There's also research now into different winglet shapes. So one of the more, kind of out there ones that I read was about, okay, so you think about a bird flying, or you think about an eagle. Well, an eagle's wings spread differently at different points of flight. So basically there would be a winglet to mimic the spread of an eagle's feathers based on what's most efficient at that flight time.
Right.
Same thing with, there's some research now into, they're called shape memory alloys. And so what they do is under certain flight conditions, under certain temperatures, these metals can actually bend and then retain their shape.
Yeah, sorry.
It's okay. They can actually bend and retain their shape based on what's more aerodynamically efficient. So instead of us as engineers going, okay, I think this is what's most efficient, here's what I think my airflow over this wing is going to do, the airflow would actually direct your wing or your winglet into what is most efficient.
Yeah.
And what's most fuel efficient, what's going to reduce the most emissions, all that cool stuff. So instead of us having to try to figure that out, it would do it for us mid-flight.
Wow. That's so crazy.
Yeah.
And it's crazy to see what's going to happen with all that.
Yeah,
Wow.
it's super interesting.
Yeah, man. You got some really cool stuff going for you. I can say that.
Thank you.
If you had one piece of advice to share with people, the world, what would it be?
One thing that I'm trying to live by right now,
Mhm.
and I say this a lot, is do what would make your 10-year-old self proud. You can't focus all the time on what other people think of you or what grade you got or what your GPA is, because that is no measure of a person.
Right.
What is a measure of a person is, are you proud of yourself?
Mhm.
Are you happy with the things that you're doing? Do you feel satisfied with the things that you're doing in your life? And the reason I say my 10-year-old self is because I try to be, in whatever I do, the role model that I would have needed. If I were my 10-year-old self looking up to me, would I be missing anything?
Yeah.
And I think that you can apply that to the individual person, whether you're 10 years old or 12 years old or whatever.
Right.
But it's just a way of kind of self-reflection that I think has, in my life, been very useful.
No, that's great to live by.
Thank you.
And I just gotta say, you not only would you be a great role model for your 10-year-old self, but you're a great role model for a lot of other people who want to follow into your footsteps as well.
Thank you.
So thank you for the work that you've been doing, and keep up the excellent job.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure having you on the show. You're welcome back anytime.
Thanks.
Really, just shoot me a text and we'll get you in the studio.
Okay.
Mhm.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah.
I'm very excited to, get another opportunity to talk about my research. And like I said, I'm a big fan of lifelong learning, so I like sharing that with people.
Yeah, I like hearing it.
Thanks.
Again, this is your host, John, of the Research Review, creating a platform to inspire. Peace out.